I've always wanted to start up a project, but I didn't know at the time of IVAC what it would be, how it would manifest. I'd started visiting Nigeria again, and I was shocked by the lack of critical discourse within what was a fairly vibrant art scene. So it was mainly commercial, and I thought, well, there's no point in repeating what is being done. I'm not a gallerist, I'm not a commercial person, I'm not a businesswoman. So I thought, maybe little by little we can begin to develop, dialogue and discourse around contemporary artistic practices. I wanted a diversity of critical and art historical discourse. As you know, there was very little, if any, discourse around women artists. And I thought that, it shouldn't be like that, because there's a long history of feminist artistic practice and history, of which Katie Deepwell is an expert. That's her area of specialization. And I thought it would be really nice for her to come and trace the trajectory of an international, which is mainly Euro-American, with a bit of other parts of the world thrown in, to come and give a talk around that. And having Eddie Chambers, I also wanted us to liaise with the African diaspora. Over here, we begin to engage with the African diaspora. Africa, of course, is important because at the time there wasn't enough interaction across the continent, so I thought it was important to bring people from Zambia and South Africa. The hope of a new beginning, the hope of a global art market. The 20th century excluded the diversity of voices and practices that existed around the world, whether it was in museums or in art fairs or commercial galleries. It was very white, male dominated. So with the new millennium, it gives you new hope, and it allows you to dream, to think about what are the possibilities, out there, and how can we begin to enact and implement, these possibilities. To start up a project, you need to have the funds to start it up. Of course, I was still very active, developing also, my curatorial skills, and seeing what was possible, understanding, most importantly, I hadn't moved to Nigeria when I did IVAC. I didn't move back here for 7 years. And, even though I moved back in 2002, actually, and I didn't start anything for 5 years, because I didn't want to come in and do something that was implanted into this context without understanding, the context in which I was living. And I was hoping that, in doing that and taking my time, meeting people, having discussions, and just being active, I could begin to understand, what was happening in Nigeria, but also across Africa. So, and then, that possibility to start the project started, because I just felt that the kind of work or curatorial practice that I wanted to develop wasn't being encouraged or supported either by the expatriate community, whether it's British Council or Goethe, and a friend of mine said, Bisi, if you really want to do this, you better just find the means to do it. It took us a year. We got this space in February. We didn't open till December, so it was, as a little bit of money came in, we'll put the floors, a little bit of money came in, we'll paint, a little bit of money came in, we'll do the tables. So it was, it was a labor of love, it was about time as well, and just trying to get the resources to do it. To a certain extent, it's accurate in the sense that I was coming from a context in which art had gone beyond just painting, of day-to-day scenes. It had gone beyond sculpture, and the possibilities of artistic practice were boundless. There were no boundaries. I mean, what we have, which, goes back to the 60s, 70s, as Lucy, the American art critic Lucy Lippert said, is a dematerialization, of the art object. I mean, of course, the grandfather of that is Marcel Duchamp, with the urinal. So the fact that here, you go from one exhibition to the other, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, and you are faced, with a very narrow staple of artistic practice, of, contextual interest, apolitical work that was not really speaking much about, the turbulent times, but also the exciting times, the new millennium in which we were engaging. And a lot of the work, by men, focused on women, mother and child, market women, and was devoid of the complexities of most of these women's lives. It was a little bit unacceptable. So, and you had a young generation that were interested in video art, performance art, sound art, photography as an art form, not just reportage or documentary, but conceptual photography. And to a certain extent, they didn't really know where to turn to and how to navigate a global art scene. So those are some of the things that informed the setting up of CCA, where we wanted to encourage a community of artists, want them to see CCA as home. The library, of course, is the core of what we do, the starting point, because without that knowledge base, you can be groping in the dark. So the library was important. The gallery, came second as a space for experimenting with the knowledge that you had acquired and for disseminating, that knowledge. I think not as much as we would like, but on one hand, it's not been about quantity, but it's been about, quality, in the sense that we have artists who come here and they can be coming once a week or once a month for a year or two. And when they go out there and they have to give a talk, all of a sudden they find that what they'd learnt in the library, what they'd read, comes into use. So for those who want to, for those who recognize, that possibility, it's been extremely effective. Over 25 years, 1995, I left for the UK in 1973. Of course, I've been doing a lot of research through books, publications, so I sort of had an idea of a more historical kind, of art, as opposed to what was happening on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not a big fan, I never was, I still am not a big fan of the all-encompassing exhibition where we try to put everything in it. I like to take a starting point and then use a couple of artists to engage, with those themes in an in-depth manner. And then, you can move out, if you're having a certain amount of space, you don't need to have 60 artists, or 40 artists there. So for me, it's never been, because if you don't know much about the art scene, then you see one work by Bruce Onobrakpaya, one work by Benamumu, one work. How does that begin to tell a story about the artist or even the art scene? Yes and no. Of course, my education was Eurocentric. Even at my interview, they were like, we're not going to be doing courses on African art. And I said, I'm not coming here for you to teach me about African art or black art. I'm here to gain, knowledge of the histories, the methodologies, and the strategies, that allow me to go out and do what I feel interested to do, in my field, in my area of interest, but with the tools, and apply some of those tools or adapt those tools to my context and my areas of interest. In the UK, if not everywhere, because I was looking at a course in the US, the BARD curatorial course, but it hadn't yet received its validation. And then a colleague of mine told me about the Royal College course, which was in its first year. So I was actually part of the second intake. So, curating within a formal educational structure was relatively new. Well, I was born in Lagos. I'm from the Brazilian quarters, Da Silva. I grew up here till I was age 11, as you said. Went to Mainland Preparatory Primary School, Nikorodu Road, owned by the Pierces, Mr. and Mrs. Pierce. And then I moved at age 11 for secondary school to the UK. First of all to Wales, North Wales, Lowther College, and then I moved to Sussex, Ancaster House School. At that time, I'd always been interested in culture and history. I wasn't particularly interested in art, or I wasn't against it either, but I didn't really know about it. So when I moved to France, what I knew was that I wanted to engage with other cultures, learn about other cultures, travel the world. So I thought I might become somebody who worked either for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the diplomatic community, or be a translator in the international organizations. So, I went to study French in France at the University of Dijon, which is where I started taking more humanities courses. So we took philosophy, history of art, and it's through that my interests in history of art really began, because I did history of modern art, 1850 to 1950, and it's there that I came across, Picasso, but also classical African art, and that's what piqued my interest in saying, okay, so these are long gone, but what are African artists today? What are they doing? What kind of work? What are they saying about Africa? And so that's really the beginning of the journey. After the University of Dijon in France, where I did languages with art history option, I also went back to the UK and did a PG for business linguists, because I still didn't know what I could do with art. So I was still going on the route of foreign affairs. So I wanted to, apart from my literature language, I wanted to add a business language to that. So did that, and then one thing led to the other. I started volunteering in arts organizations, like the Commonwealth Institute. There was a project there I volunteered with. Then I was an administrator with a South African dance group, and one thing led to the other, and then I found out about the Royal College course, which of course defined the trajectory that I wanted to take, and that's what I've done most of my professional life. Women were so invisible, and I think that they were also a part of the invisibility, because they would say, oh, the kids, I don't have time, this, that and the other, life is hard, I don't, so I think they were part of that. Whereas you have a new generation who are also married, have kids. We just saw Temitayo Ogumbi has 2 children under the age of 5, but she's just returned from a residency in America, took her 2 children, and is developing new works. So somehow they managed to, find a way. They don't want to sacrifice, their interests on the altar of marriage, really. And also in looking at books, the only sort of comprehensive book is the one that was done by NGA. I think that was in 2004. At the time when I saw it, around 2004, 2005, I was a little bit disappointed in it. But then I came back in seeing, then I didn't know there were few, if any, books. But in coming back to it nearly 10 years later, I just think it's a brilliant starter. It had over 13 essays. Out of the 13 essays, only 2 were by women. All 11 essays were by men, which is very interesting to read as well, because of this sort of patriarchal language, that reinforced over and over again that women, didn't have the time, didn't have the support, which, I understand it's not, untrue in developing their artistic practice. And, that got me thinking that, what else is there? And what was really interesting is that Kolade Oshinowo's contribution to the book was a list of invitation cards for exhibitions. So he did this kind of statistical analysis of how many women were in the exhibitions. I thought that was really, and there were quite a few, so it wasn't as if they were invisible. They did do show, but I guess they weren't visible on the market, really. And so that's really why I say that women and the language, the discourse around art in Nigeria then was completely and totally male dominated. Completely. Women were shy to voice their opinion. The confidence wasn't there to assert their own agency, I would say. And yeah, that was problematic to me, as a woman, where I didn't feel that, I had to bow to any male discourse. And I understood this strategy of making certain sections, whether it's the black community, whether it's women, whether it's other minorities, invisible. Because coming from, the UK and the struggle of people like Eddie Chambers and the Black Art Group and Rashid Areen, we understand how artists are made invisible. In fact, the women are giving the men a good run for their money. We have a lot of artists, female artists. The exhibition we have downstairs, is impressive, and it's a woman artist working in a different media that's not sculpture. It's sculptural, it's not painting, and she's, presenting her work confidently to a wide audience. And, we have others like, of course, Ndidi, Taye, Daho, even younger generation coming up like Marcelina, Akpo, Tojo, Moduke, Faduba. It's a very, very exciting time for women artists. They, I think, are claiming their space. They're claiming it and owning it. We have Odumori Molade, we have Kwejulai Wala, the list goes on and on and on. I think they're beginning to show women. We're beginning to have shows, and we're beginning to think about exhibitions that are no longer acceptable in having male artists. So I think there's that awareness. I think that they are in the exhibition catalogues. What we do need to do is to raise the level of critical content. So we do exhibition catalogues, which are in most cases geared towards collectors, as opposed to academic readership. The absence of art history within our formal educational structure is a big, 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 big problem, which I really don't know how we're going to rectify. I think either he was specific or not, if he's saying there are a lot of innovative projects, even with the Zaria Rebels, Bari, as you said, Uli, these are innovative sort of art institutions and art forms. So from a historical perspective, I guess in the 60s and 70s, there was a very dynamic, which is harnessed by post-independence euphoria, but then that fizzled out, 80s and sort of 90s, with nearly 2 decades, up to nearly 2 decades of military dictatorship, which stifled, the growth of the art scene. With the return of democracy, of course, people began to open up and to experiment. I mean, I remember some of the times that I came, the Goethe Institute, they had, my first show of, at the Goethe was Junkman, oh, yeah. A performance he did. And I remember one of my first shows at my dream gallery was by Uche Udochi, which were paintings, but it also included a performance. And I thought that was great. Whether they knew what they were doing or not is not the point, but the fact that they wanted to experiment and go out of the box, I thought that was really, really great. But it was all piecemeal. It wasn't a constant. And I feel that to a certain extent, CCA was expressly opened to engage more experimental media. So we are very interested in artists working, outside of the traditional media. So once you were working outside of that, we really wanted to engage with you. We really wanted to. So I think, and then also I would say, it's probably one of the first professional curatorial organizations led by curator as opposed to by a collector or an artist or an art patron or anybody else. My background, my educational background is curating. It's not medicine, it's not law. I didn't cross over. This is what I do, this is what I wanted to do, this is what I went out to study. So I think that also gave us, an edge, if you wish, in a very experimental environment. Well, no, most of them are not. Curating and curator has become a catch-all phrase. It's a very sexy phrase at the moment. It's sexy to be a curator, but it's, what they're doing is actually exhibition organizing. They bring together artists whose work they like. They're not, because if they were curating, we'll have a lot more documentation, a lot more critical discussion, going on. A lot of our exhibitions, like the one downstairs, can take a year and a half, to do studio visits, engaging, pushing, the artist, and then trying to write a text, about it. Most of the dynamic artistic scene of the new millennium in Nigeria has not yet been documented. Well, I think more young people are interested in curating and doing it properly. So they take, short courses. Some take, 3 months, 6 months, even 1 year courses, to go and really get up to date so that they can make, concrete contributions, to the artistic scene in their countries. So that's happening more and more. People really see the value, I guess, of curating. 10 years ago, a few people would say, I'm going to do an MA in curating. But now people are like, what are the courses that I can go and do, in curating? So that's really great. And I feel that, and more institutions doing projects, doing workshops, doing everything to, for capacity development around curatorial practice. So it's a new field, across the African continent, but it's a growing one, and hopefully it will become more professionalized. The inaugural exhibition was Democracy. 3 solo exhibitions. It opened with Lemi Garioku, the second was George Oshodi, and the third was Ndidi Ndike. Part of my work is a continuous process of researching, finding out who's out there, what are they doing, what do I find interesting. Now the project with hair has been with me from day one as a curator. And that came out of the work of Sonia Boyce, a Black British artist, and David Hammonds, an African-American artist, working with the idea of hair. So for over 25 years, I've always wanted to do works around hair or projects around hair in the UK, and then also with Faisal Abdullah, who I've worked very closely with, who is a barber, but also an artist. So I'm really interested, from the UK, I was interested in the cultural politics of black hair and the way in which, one is determined racially through our hair, or how one is signified, through hair, and the way in which artists were working with it. One, as material, that's the hair. David Hammonds used to go to barbershops and collect hair and make these hair sculptures, and also, thinking about hair as content as well, which, you know, Ojikere did in taking all those pictures around, you know, hairstyles. So I like to think that my practice is artist-led. The starting point is an artist, and then once I like one, I'm like, oh, who else is working like this? And then you begin to see a few artists, and then little by little you see the commonalities and, you know, the similarities, and you begin to develop, you know, an idea, a curatorial premise with these artists, you know, in them. Others can be topical issues, like I'm really interested in this idea of mineral resources and the way in which, you know, Africa is such a rich continent, yet it's, you know, one of the poorest, you know, as well. And then so many artists that have worked with that. You know, we have Sami Baloji, you know, from LDC, Republic Democratic of Congo. We have Zwelitu Matatua, who has done the gold miners. We have George Oshudi, that has dealt with oil, petrol. So, you know, little by little you begin to see artists working with these subject matters. And even from that, from resources, you now get to environment, of course, and then you now start looking at artists who have the environment as, you know, an important point of their work. With the Lucy Azubuike and Zanelli Moholi, I'm very, of course, interested in working with female artists. And, you know, it was one of the first exhibitions on the body and sexuality in Nigeria. A very controversial exhibition, especially because of Zanelli's work that deals with, you know, black lesbian experiences in South Africa at a time when Nigeria weren't dealing openly with these issues. So for me, that was really important to be able to bring two really dynamic young women artists, you know, dealing with issues around femininity, you know, about their experiences or their mother's experiences, dealing with the body, you know, and a lot of things that we like to sweep under the carpet, bringing it, you know, into the exhibition space. So the exhibition is not just an exhibition, it's a tool for discussion, you know, discussing different subjects in a visual kind of way. ASICO was inspired by the gaps in the educational system, the gaps in the knowledge base of a lot of young artists coming out of schools. You spend 4, 5, 6 years, you know, supposedly in university. And, you know, I mentioned Documenta and you don't know what I'm talking about. I mentioned the Venice Biennale, you've never heard of it. You know, even I can mention Malangatana from Mozambique, an artist, one of the top artists, you've never heard about it. You know, so many things, they knew nothing. So I'm like, what are you guys learning? But also in artists talking about their work as well. They didn't have the vocabulary or the confidence to talk about their work. And also, you know, how do we help them to go beyond just painting and sculpture? So with ASICO, we wanted to focus on critical research, conceptual strategies, and research methodologies, and bring those together, taking them outside of their comfort zone. The first international art school, before it became ASICO, the first 3 were thematic, on independence and the ambivalence of promise, celebrating 50 years of, you know, independence of 17 countries across the African continent, which was problematic because few of the artists had really engaged with that history. So the idea was, as ASICO is a curatorial project, let's have it, it doesn't manifest as an exhibition, it manifests as a pedagogical program, but let's have a thematic like you would with an exhibition, and then bring people with same interests in the same subject together, and let's see what that brings. The second one was on history materiality, because I found a lot of the time that the artists will be talking about their work, they'll say it's about this, and then when you look at the work, the material that was used has absolutely nothing to do with what they're saying. So there was a disconnect between content and material. So how do you bring those two together successfully and talk about whatever it is you want to talk about? And the third one was on the archive, you know, the archive in the sense that because of the lack of research, you know, people were not used to working with any kind of archive, whether it was personal, even your parents' images are kind of archive. And then And that's why I find Kilani's work interesting, because, you know, not only is he engaging with the personal archive, he's also engaging with the wider societal archive. And, you know, that's, for me, was really, really interesting, how you can cross time and time, you know, can coalesce into one project or one exhibition. Well, you know, a big city, 20 million people like Lagos, with thousands of artists earning their living. This is the capital of art in Nigeria. Over 180 million people, and there isn't a museum of modern or contemporary art. You know, most of the exhibitions are in houses that have been reconfigured as gallery spaces, which is limiting. Even the show we have downstairs, I wish we had double the ceilings so the work could really come, the monumentality of the work can really come into its own. And, you know, the art scene, no matter how much collectors are buying, artists are showing abroad, you know, why hasn't Elf shown here? Which space would he show in, for example? You know, so most artists, as the works get bigger, more complex, they show abroad. So we're losing, you know, those possibilities, which means that just like our traditional art, we all have to go abroad, where few people can get visas to see even contemporary artists' work. So that is, you know, we have the spaces, you know, a lot of them lying fallow that could be used. So that's what it came out of, you know, just for us to dream about the possibilities, because, you know, if you don't dream, it's not going to happen. You know, the public art initiative is absolutely amazing. It's like a dream come true. But unfortunately, it wasn't implemented, you know, in a professional way, in the sense that this is an art project, okay? And the most complex aspect of curating or contemporary art is public art, because, you know, you're putting work for thousands of people out there, and, you know, it's called public art in public or public art. And I felt that the work, the background work, contextual, historical, you know, what do we already have on ground? How do they work? What are people's responses to it? Do they have an opinion? Don't they? You know, it would have been nice to have a few public stakeholder meetings for some of them, so that, you know, what we learn is to never take it for granted that people don't know. They do know. Everybody has an opinion. We've had people walk off the street, come to CCA Gallery, say, I don't know anything about art, but they join in the critique based on what they see. And sometimes it's refreshing, even more than those who know. So now we have the whole city dotted with these works across the city. And, you know, which in a way shows almost a lack of knowledge of the power, the monumental power of public art. You know, those who commission probably didn't know, and those doing the commissioning probably didn't know as well. But just take one city, Chicago, you know, as an example. Chicago is a city in which art, some of the most beautiful work, are in the public space. You know, we have Picasso, we have Lichtenstein, we have Anish Kapoor. The Being by Anish Kapoor, it has millions, not thousands, millions of people going to visit it, to be photographed by it every year. These are tourist attractions. So the goal or the idea or the dream is there, but the implementation has fallen extremely short of what are possible. And, you know, I'm always posting on my Facebook page interesting public art that I see. The last one was by at the Ralph Ellison Memorial Park in New York City, and it was a work done by the African-American artist and sculptor Elizabeth Catlett, and the work was called Invisible Man, after his book The Invisible Man. Naturally, you're relating, this is where the sculpture is going to be based, so you're relating it to the author, you know, and one of his most, you know, iconic books. And it's a beautiful work which, you know, during the day it's almost invisible, you know. At night it begins, you know, the figure of a man begins to come out. So, you know, how genius is that? I don't even know what we have here. We have other works that have been created from what they normally do, small sculptures in bronze, just made a larger size. And even the materials, why aren't we experimenting with wood, steel, marble, and all these other durable materials? Even sound, I mean, there was an artist who did a work that was appropriated from a British artist, and he didn't do the sound element, but he did everything else, added a little difference, and that was it. The other work was something, from the Singapore, whatever. Yes, it was monumental and all that, but if they had somebody guiding them, if you don't have the skills, bring in the expertise to do it. And when you do, it will be amazing. I think, we had begun to have conversations as we were both, thinking. I was thinking of developing a consultancy in addition to my curatorial work. And she had just finished an MBA and was developing her consultancy as well. And I just remember saying that one needs to think products, have a product. People have tried to do art fairs. In Ghana, there's a young girl who tried to do it, all over the continent, that never get off the ground. So I'm like, what about an art fair? So I think it really clicked, went away and came back a few weeks later and said, yes, I think, that would be a great thing to do, and I would love to work with you. Now, for me, it's great. I'm always keen on supporting anything that would help bolster, develop the art scene. So from day one, I was like, I'm not really a commercial person, so art fairs are not really my platform. But of course, I'm happy to help to develop the program, and if necessary, mentor a younger generation just like her to take over, so that I can focus on my consultancy, which was going to be more research based. So from day one, it was never supposed to be a long-term thing. I'll say three things that are kind of like priorities, or four things. One, we really want to use the library as a catalyst for curatorial and critical thinking. We have so many books and so many material here, and we would like to find ways of making it not just static, take it off the shelf, look, and you put it back, but how can we make it more interactive? How can we use, we've got some amazing material. We have the New Culture Journal by Demos Monku. We have most of the edition of Nigeria Magazine. We're going to get Odu, which I'd never heard of, until I was told by Janet Stanley of the Smithsonian that she would like to send us copies. So we have all these, and she sent other things. So I have people sending things either across, Raphael Chukukwa, the chief curator at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. He sent us the first reports of the first International Pan-African Congress. So we have all these things, there. What can we do with them? How can we activate the library? So that's one priority. We've done a couple of projects, like publishing Against the Grain exhibition that we had, a collaboration with the International Curators International in New York. So that was good. These are obscure publications on art by artists, curators. They're not mainstream like Freeze, for example. You may not have heard of them. So we had a beautiful display of that. So that's one thing we hope to continue looking at, because as we go into our 11th year, we want to be more of a research focus. There's so many people doing exhibitions now that we don't need to repeat the same thing. So we look at what's not out there and how can we, with what we have here, it's phenomenal. It's the largest independent art library on the African continent. Yes, the others are in South Africa, but they're within institutions, the University of Cape Town, University of. This is independent, not funded by anything or by anyone. This library is not funded at all. It's never been from day one, and until now it hasn't. So it's, I guess, a labor of love, really. And people have been responsive, they've been generous, sent books, catalogs, everything that we need. Artists as well, they come here, leave 1 or 2 copies of their publications. We have a Nigerian section that's growing nicely. We have an African section that's growing nicely. We have a monograph section that's going, so that, you know, we interact with Yaba Tech and University of Lagos, who the students, you know, come and use the library for their research. So the library is very key. I mean, when CCA was being set up, it was going to be about knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, which is what IVAC was about. So I thought it would be a continuation of that. But then I thought people would be sitting here reading all these books, having access to all this material, but there's no space for that energy to be released. And that's how the gallery space came about. The second thing is we're doing research on the pioneering women artists in Nigeria who have almost totally been written out of Nigerian art history. So the first woman, Clara Etso Ubudaga. The second woman is Afi Ekong. The third woman is Teresa Locke Akinwale. And the fourth woman is Colette Omogbai. So we're like searching for these women, trying to see what information we can get. And they were very radical women in their time, very radical. Colette had her first solo show at Imbari in Bayo at age 23. The work was collected by Uli Bayer, who also wrote about her. Clara was the first indigenous female art teacher. She taught all the Zaria rebels at the university, ABU in Zaria. She also helped set up the art department at the University of Benin, as well as the art department at the University of Yaoundé, because she married a Cameroonian. So, you know, they may not have continued their art practice in the way that a lot of men have the leisure to, but they were very crucial. You know, Colette Omogbai, she's probably the first, you know, and they all schooled abroad, Slade or Central St. Martin's, because this is in the, you know, 40s and 50s when we were still a colony, so you went abroad to go and study. So they all, you know, Camberwell, Slade, Chelsea, they went to those schools. And Colette also, she was interested in art education. She did a PhD at Columbia University, which she finished in 1976 on art education in Nigeria, and worked for 15 to 20 years in the Ministry of Education in Benin. The third one is I'd like to do a substantive publication on CCA, 10 years of CCA, which hopefully begins to articulate, you know, and put it in the context of what's been happening in Nigeria and across, you know, the continent. But through our programs, what did we do? You know, reflect on it, but also make it out there so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. I've been extremely lucky, and I've done as much as I could and would love to. I don't think anything has been really left out. When I look back, I'm happy with my trajectory. You know, I did the best that I could. I don't want to be somebody else. I try and, you know, over the years I begin to learn what am I interested in, you know, what kind of curatorial practice can I do, and, you know, how do I begin to articulate this practice. And that's maturing, you know, this vocabulary, this knowledge, and I'm really happy, you know, to have been able to have these amazing opportunities. So I guess in a way I've lived my dream, I've lived my passion, and I continue to dream.